You probably think democracy's survival depends on elections, free speech, and good leadership. But in the age of AI, it might depend more on how lines of code are written than on how ballots are counted. Because the real fight for democracy isn't happening inside voting booths anymore. It's happening inside algorithms you'll never see. In this episode, I'll share 4 ancient principles Harari says we can embed into our technology to keep it working for us, not against us. But first, welcome back to Seeds of Meaning. I'm truly grateful you're here. If you're new, my name is Nick Walker, and this is a space for curious minds, deep thinkers, and anyone looking to reconnect with truth, meaning, and purpose. Each week, we explore books that challenge how we see the world and help us grow intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed by the noise and you're looking for something that feeds your mind and nourishes your soul, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving back into Nexus, a brief history of information networks from the Stone Age to AI by Yuval Noah Harari. And this episode is for anyone who still believes in democracy, but feels like it's starting to break apart. Maybe you felt the shift, more division, less trust, more outrage, and less clarity. Like we're all speaking at the same time, but nobody's actually listening. Harari's asking a haunting question here. Can we still hold a conversation? Because that's what democracy really is. Not just a system for voting, but a living network built on mutual understanding, public dialogue, and shared values. But here's the good news. Harari doesn't just diagnose the problem. He gives us 4 ancient principles that could help us rebuild democracy from the inside out. So, in this episode, we're going to explore how benevolence, not manipulation, should be the foundation of digital data systems. Why decentralization might make democracy messy, but also make it resilient. What it means to demand mutual transparency in a world where they know everything about us, and how systems that never let us rest or change can start to feel like digital prisons. We'll also talk about what happens when a network grows so complex, so fast, that even the smartest people in the room can't explain what's gone wrong. And we'll wrestle with the real question at the heart of this chapter. If we don't embed our democratic values into the technologies we use, can we really call the result a democracy? If that resonates with you, I'd love to invite you to subscribe, not just to keep up, but to grow with us. And as we go, drop your reflections in the comments, because this isn't just content, it's conversation. Let's get into it. On page 455, the author says, while experts should spend lifelong careers discussing the finer details, it is crucial that the rest of us understand the fundamental principles that democracies can and should follow. The key message is that these principles are neither new nor mysterious. They have been known for centuries, even millennia. Citizens should demand that they be applied to the new realities of the computer age. The first principle is benevolence. When a computer network collects information on me, that information should be used to help me rather than manipulate me. He goes on to say, having access to our personal life comes with a fiduciary duty to act in our best interest. Why not extend this obvious and ancient principle to computers and algorithms? Harari is getting straight to the point here. He's saying we don't need a PhD in computer science or political theory to understand what democracy needs in the digital age. The answers aren't buried in some tech manual. They've been with us since the dawn of civilization. The first principle he calls for is benevolence, a word we don't hear enough when we talk about technology. Benevolence means do no harm. It means the systems collecting your data, the apps tracking your location, the platforms analyzing your behavior, the algorithms personalizing your feed, should use that information to help you, not manipulate you. He compares it to a fiduciary duty, a term usually used in finance or law. If a lawyer has access to your personal life, your private life, they're legally bound to act in your best interest. If a doctor knows your deepest vulnerabilities, they're sworn to do no harm. That's the kind of trust that makes these relationships work. So Harari is saying, why don't we hold our digital networks to the same standard? Why do we tolerate systems that know our secrets, our behaviors, our habits, our fears, and then use that knowledge to addict us, sell to us, and steer our behavior without our awareness? This isn't a small request. It's a radical reframing of responsibility in the information age. He's saying that just because a company can track you doesn't mean they should. And if they do, their job is to protect your autonomy, not take advantage of it. This is the baseline principle for any ethical democracy in a digital world. Power over information must come with care. If a system is designed to nudge you, predict you, and shape your choices, it should be designed with your well-being in mind. Otherwise, democracy starts to rot from the inside. Let's keep going. On page 457, the author says, the second principle that would protect democracy against the rise of totalitarian surveillance regimes is decentralization. A democratic society should never allow all its information to be concentrated in one place, no matter whether that hub is the government or a private corporation. He goes on to say, for the survival of democracy, some inefficiency is a feature, not a bug. Here, Harari is challenging one of the most seductive myths of the digital age, that efficiency is always good. We live in a world obsessed with optimization, faster algorithms, streamlined systems, centralized platforms that promise convenience, simplicity, and control. But democracy? Democracy is supposed to be a little messy. The second principle Harari names is decentralization, and it's essential for protecting us from abuse of power. At first glance, centralization sounds like a smart move. Put all the data in one place, make decisions quicker, run everything from one dashboard. But when all the information flows through a single hub, whether that's a government, a tech company, or an AI system, it creates an enormous risk. Whoever controls that hub can see everything, and eventually they can control everything too. Think about it. If one company owns your search history, shopping behavior, and healthcare data, and political views, if one government can monitor your movement, your speech, and your relationships in real time, what happens when that power is used for manipulation instead of service? Harari is saying, don't confuse democracy with efficiency. In a democracy, it's okay if things move a little slower. It's okay if decisions require debate, if power is shared across institutions, if data is distributed across different platforms. That inefficiency is what protects you. It's what keeps one group from gaining total control, and it creates space for accountability, revision, and resistance. This is especially important in the age of AI, where centralization is the default. One model, trained on everything. One interface, used by billions of people. Harari's warning is simple. If we give up decentralization for speed and ease, we may win the race, but lose the system. Let's keep going. All right. I lost my place. Okay. On page 459, the author says, a third democratic principle is mutuality. If democracies increase surveillance of individuals, they must simultaneously increase surveillance of government and corporations too. He goes on to say, democracy requires balance. Governments and corporations often develop apps and algorithms as tools for top-down surveillance, but algorithms can just as easily become powerful tools for bottom-up transparency and accountability, exposing bribery and tax evasion. If they know more about us, while we simultaneously know more about them, the balance is kept. Harari's third principle, mutuality, might be the most provocative yet, because it flips the entire power dynamics of surveillance on its head. We've gotten used to the idea that governments and corporations get to watch us. Every click, every swipe, every purchase. They say it's for security or personalization or innovation. But rarely do we ask, what do we get to see in return? Mutuality is about balance. If you know where I live, I should know what decisions you're making that affect my neighborhood. If you're tracking my preferences, I should be able to track how your algorithm prioritizes content or prices. If I'm transparent to you, you should be transparent to me too. Harari isn't naive here. He knows governments and companies often use surveillance to maintain control, to monitor dissent, silence critics, or optimize profits. But he's also pointing to a radical opportunity. What if the same technology used to spy on the public could be used to hold the powerful accountable? Imagine a world where citizens could audit government contracts in real time, where whistleblowers could trace corporate money flows using public blockchain records. AI could help journalists uncover corruption, not just sell ads. The tools already exist, but they're not being designed or deployed with mutuality in mind. Instead, the gaze only goes one way, and that's where democracy begins to unravel. Harari's message here is clear. Surveillance itself isn't inherently undemocratic. Unbalanced surveillance is. If we want democracy to survive the digital age, we can't just fight against being watched. We have to fight for the right to watch back. And for our last principle, on page 460, the author says, a fourth democratic principle is that surveillance systems must always leave room for both change and rest. In human history, oppression can take the form of either denying humans the ability to change or denying them the opportunity to rest. He goes on to say, democratic societies that employ powerful surveillance technology, therefore, need to be aware of the extremes of both over rigidity and over pliability. This last principle, rest and change, might be the most human of them all. It's also the one where we're most likely to overlook in a world that's always online. Harari is reminding us that freedom isn't just about speech or choice. It's about timing. A healthy democracy doesn't just give you the right to act. It gives you the space to pause, reflect, recover, and evolve. But when surveillance is constant, when data is collected 24/7, when algorithms are always monitoring your behavior in real time, something shifts. Suddenly, you're not allowed to make mistakes without being punished by a permanent record, grow or change your mind without being algorithmically boxed into your past self, unplug without falling behind, being flagged, or losing social capital. This is what Harari means by the danger of over-rigidity and over-pliability. Over-rigidity is when systems freeze you in place. Your credit score, your criminal record, your past searches, all follow you like shadows, making it harder to reinvent yourself. Over-pliability is the opposite, when algorithms constantly push you to shift, optimize, hustle, and never stop moving. You become a product that needs to be constantly improved, not a person who deserves to just be. In both extremes, your humanity is flattened. Harari is saying, if you don't build time and grace into our systems, if we don't protect people's right to grow, to rest, and to start over, then we're not living in a democracy. We're living in a performance. So this final principle is about design, but also about dignity, the right to change, the right to rest, the right to not be watched while we do both. We're living in a moment where democracy feels like it's fraying, not from a dramatic collapse, but from a slow erosion. And often, when we talk about saving democracy, the conversation turns into a fog of politics, personalities, and platform debates. But Harari cuts through the noise by doing something radical. He brings us back to principles, not politics, not partisanship, but four ancient ideas that any free society should be built on. Benevolence. Technology should serve people, not manipulate them. Decentralization. Power should be spread out, not hoarded. Mutuality. If they watch us, we must be able to watch them. And rest and change. We must be allowed to grow, pause, and just be human. These aren't tech ideas. They're not left versus right arguments. They're moral anchors. And if we don't tie our systems to them, our systems will drift toward exploitation by default. Why does this matter now? Because we're coding our future right now. Every app we build, every term of service we click on, every data system we normalize, we're shaping the boundaries of what's acceptable in the digital world. And most of us are doing it without realizing that the stakes are democratic. Harari is giving us a map, not just to resist manipulation, but to reimagine responsibility. He's reminding us that if democracy is going to survive in an age of smart machines and invisible code, it has to be built into the network itself. This matters because we're no longer just users. We're citizens of a digital society. And like any society, it needs rules, not just for what works, but for what's right. And these four principles aren't just theoretical. They're already being tested, and in many cases, violated by the systems quietly shaping our lives. Take the rise of AI in decision-making, especially in areas that affect people's futures. More and more, institutions are outsourcing life-changing choices to algorithms. Schools using AI to flag which students are at risk. Employers using machine learning to scan resumes and predict culture fits. Police departments using predictive tools to decide which neighborhoods to patrol or who to arrest. Even courts using risk assessment software to guide sentencing and parole decisions. At first glance, it sounds efficient, objective, smart. But in practice, these systems are often centralized and built by a small group of companies and vendors with little oversight. Opaque, meaning the people affected can't see how decisions were made or challenge them. Biased, and trained on flawed historical data that reflect societal biases. And inflexible, offering no path for redemption, growth, or exception. You apply for a job and get rejected, not by a person, but by an algorithm. You're denied bail or kicked out of class, not because of who you are, but because of how a model interpreted your data. No conversation, no appeal, no humanity. This is exactly the opposite of what Harari is calling for. There's no benevolence when you're reduced to a data point. There's no mutuality when systems know everything about you and you know nothing about it. There's no rest when every action is recorded and scored. And there's certainly no decentralization when 5 companies write the code that governs millions of lives. This isn't science fiction. It's already happening. It's here. And if we don't ask hard questions now about transparency, fairness, and control, we risk building a future where democracy still exists on paper, but the real decisions are being made by invisible systems we never voted for, can't understand, and aren't allowed to question. If democracy is going to survive the computer age, its values can't just live in speeches and slogans. They have to be designed into the code, platforms, and policies that run our lives. Benevolence should lead to fiduciary by design. If a system holds your data, it should be built, legally and technically, to act in your best interest. That means defaults that protect you, explanations you can understand, and nudges that serve your well-being, not your addictions. Decentralization should lead to architecture choices, spread power out on purpose, favor interoperable standards, federated systems, data minimization, and independent oversight over one hub to rule them all. A little friction is a democratic safeguard. Mutuality should lead to reciprocal transparency. If they see us, we see them. Bake in audit trails, appeal mechanisms, open reporting, and explainable decisions. Surveillance without symmetry isn't governance. It's control. Rest and change should lead to human pace controls. Protect the right to pause and the right to evolve. Time limits on data, forget-me options, cooldowns, reversible choices, and second chances are not luxuries. They're freedoms. That's the heartbeat of Seeds of Meaning. Take ancient principles and implement them where they've been missing. In tech, our guiding intentions here are to enlighten, name the principles, empower, show they're actionable, thoughtfully disrupt, challenge efficiency at all costs, and help you reframe democracy as a design problem you can influence. If democracy is a conversation, this is how we encode the rules of that conversation into the system itself. Harari makes the case that the way we design our digital systems will decide the future of democracy. It's not just about who's in office. It's about whether the technology in our lives protects our freedom, shares power, and leaves room for us just to be human. So here's my question. If you could change one thing about the way today's technology works to make it more democratic, what would you change and why? These 4 principles give us a blueprint, but even if we follow them, Harari warns there's another threat on the horizon. It's not the rise of a single all-powerful surveillance state. It's actually the opposite. A world where the conversation is so fragmented and the trust so thin that holding society together becomes just as hard as keeping it free. Let's talk about that. On page 499, the author says, "The new computer network poses one final threat to democracy. Instead of digital totalitarianism, it could foster digital anarchy. The decentralized nature of democracies and their strong self-correcting mechanisms provide a shield against totalitarianism, but they also make it more difficult to ensure order. To function, a democracy needs to meet 2 conditions. It needs to enable a free public conversation on key issues, and it needs to maintain a minimum of social order and institutional trust." Up to this point, Harari has focused on how concentrated power, too much control in one place, can crush democracy. But here, he flips the concern. What if the danger isn't too much order, but not enough? He calls this threat digital anarchy, a condition where information is so decentralized, so fragmented, and so unchecked that the basic glue holding society together starts to dissolve. Democracy is designed to be open. It thrives on disagreement, debate, and the clash of ideas. Its self-correcting mechanisms, things like free press, independent courts, and elections, protect it from authoritarian takeover. But here's the trade-off. The same openness that shields us from dictatorship also makes it harder to maintain coherence. For democracy to actually function, Harari says 2 things have to be true at the same time. 1, there must be a free and honest public conversation about key issues. And 2, there must be a minimum level of trust in institutions, in shared facts, and in each other. Digital networks, as they're currently built, are great at amplifying voices, but not at ensuring those voices connect, build trust, or lead to action. You can have 1,000,000 conversations at once, but if they're in separate echo chambers, shouting across algorithmic walls, you don't get dialogue, you get noise. And without that second condition, social order and institutional trust, democracy loses the ability to decide and act. It becomes a system that can talk endlessly but can't move forward. This is the tightrope. Too much centralization, and you get digital totalitarianism. Too much fragmentation, and you get digital anarchy. Either way, democracy falters. This is where the conversation about democracy moves beyond freedom versus control and into something trickier: balance. We're living in a moment where many of the tools meant to empower us, social media, open forums, decentralized publishing, have also made it harder to agree on even the most basic conversations, basic truths. Think about it. You can live stream a protest to millions of people, but you can also live stream a conspiracy theory just as fast. You can fact check a claim instantly, but you can also spread disinformation faster than it can be corrected. You can bypass traditional gatekeepers, but you can also bypass norms and institutions that help filter out harmful noise. The danger Harari is pointing to is subtle, but devastating. A democracy that's too open can become so fragmented that it can't make decisions at all. And when a system can't make decisions, it creates a vacuum, one that's often filled by the very kinds of authoritarian forces democracy is meant to resist. This matters because the conversation about democracy often gets stuck in extremes. We need more openness. We need more control. But the truth is, without trust and shared reality, neither openness nor control will keep democracy alive. And right now, our digital networks are doing more to fracture that trust than to build it. If the challenge of the last century was fighting totalitarianism, the challenge of this one might be preventing digital anarchy from hollowing out democracy from within. A more recent and equally powerful example of Harari's digital anarchy is what we've seen in recent election cycles across multiple democracies. Thanks to digital platforms, voters have unprecedented access to information. Candidate speeches, live debates, policy proposals, fact-checking tools, all available instantly and often for free. In theory, this should make the electorate more informed and engaged than ever before. But instead of one shared national conversation, we now have thousands of parallel conversations happening in algorithm-driven silos. Two people search for the same candidate and get entirely different pictures, one painted as a hero, the other as a villain, depending on the online spaces they inhabit. This splintering makes it nearly impossible to build the minimum of social order and institutional trust that Harari says is necessary for democracy to function. When half the country believes the system is rigged against them, and the other half believe the system is rigged against them too, the very legitimacy of the election comes into question, no matter what the actual results are. The danger here isn't just misinformation, it's that even true information can be framed so differently and delivered so selectively that the idea of a shared reality collapses. And without that shared reality, you can't have meaningful debate, compromise, or policymaking. You can only have competing realities locked in endless conflict. I felt this frustration firsthand. During the last presidential election, I found it harder than ever to trust what I was hearing on the news. Not because I thought everyone was lying, but because I knew how deeply polarized the coverage had become. I'd flip between different outlets and feel like I was watching two entirely different countries. One channel would frame a story as a historical breakthrough, and another would frame the same event as a dangerous mistake. Facts weren't necessarily fabricated, but the tone, the emphasis, and the context were so different that the truth felt slippery, and it's exhausting. Because instead of us using the news to understand what's happening, you start using it to decode how each outlet is trying to shape your perception. It's less what happened and more what's their angle. That's exactly the kind of fracture Harari is talking about. Without a baseline of shared reality, even institutions that are supposed to inform us become part of the noise. And when you can't tell which voices to trust, the temptation is to tune them all out, which is its own kind of danger for a democracy that depends on an informed public. This quote connects directly to the point of this video because it shows the flip side of the challenge. If the first threat to democracy is unchecked control, the second is unchecked fragmentation, and both can be addressed by baking democratic values into our digital systems from the start. In a world where news, conversations, and even facts are splintered into isolated bubbles, we need technology that doesn't just enable speech, but fosters constructive dialogue. That means designing platforms and algorithms that prioritize context over outrage, connection over division, and trust building over click-through rate. Harari's warning is that democracy can't survive if our networks only optimize for individual attention. They have to be built to preserve a shared reality, even when we disagree. And that requires the same 4 principles we explored earlier: systems that act in our best interest, spread power, ensure mutual accountability, and give space for change and reflection. Because if we don't intentionally design for these values, the default design, driven by profit, speed, and virality, will pull us further into digital anarchy. And once that spiral begins, rebuilding trust becomes exponentially harder. Harari warns that one of the biggest dangers to democracy today isn't total control, it's total fragmentation. When our conversations splinter into separate realities, it becomes harder to agree on basic facts, let alone solve big problems together. I've noticed this myself, especially during the last election, when it felt like every news outlet was giving a completely different version of the same story. So, I want to hear from you. When you're trying to understand what's really going on in the world, how do you decide which sources to trust? Do you compare multiple outlets, follow a handful of reliable voices, or take a completely different approach? Now, if fragmentation makes it hard to hold conversation, Harari says there's an even deeper challenge. We might not even understand why the conversation is breaking down. Because in the age of algorithms and intercomputer networks, the forces shaping our politics are becoming so complex and so hidden that even the most basic questions about what's going wrong are hard to answer. And that uncertainty, he warns, could be the thing that finally breaks democracy. Let's finish strong. On page 509, the author says, "The truth is that while we can easily observe that the democratic information network is breaking down, we aren't sure why. That itself is a characteristic of the times. The information network has become so complicated, and it relies to such an extent on opaque algorithmic decisions and inter-computer realities that it has become very difficult for humans to answer even the most basic of political questions. Why are we fighting each other? If we cannot dissolve what is broken and fix it, large-scale democracies may not survive the rise of computer technology." Harari is closing this chapter with a sobering truth. It's not just that democracy is breaking down, it's that we don't fully understand why. In previous eras, if a political system was faltering, the causes were often visible. Economic collapse, foreign invasion, authoritarian overreach. You could point to the problem, name it, and work toward fixing it. But in the digital age, the network that carries our public conversation has become so vast, so interlinked, and so dependent on algorithms that even experts struggle to map what's actually happening. These aren't just human-to-human conversations anymore. We now have intercomputer conversations, algorithms talking to algorithms, bots shaping discourse, recommendation systems influencing what billions of people see, all without human oversight. And here's the twist. These systems are opaque by design. The algorithms that curate your feed, the data models that decide what's relevant, the AI systems that optimize for engagement, they're often trading secrets hidden behind layers of proprietary code, which means the very forces influencing public opinion and political conflict are invisible to the people living inside them. This is why Harari's question, why are we fighting each other, lands so heavily. It's not rhetorical. It's a real, practical challenge. If we can't see the mechanics behind our disagreements, we can't address them. And that's his warning. If democracies can't understand what's broken, they can't fix it. And if they can't fix it, they may not survive the rise of a political landscape shaped more by machines than by human deliberation. This is the part of Harari's warning that should make every one of us pause, because it means the fight to save democracy isn't just a battle of ideas. It's a battle of visibility. If the forces tearing democracy apart are buried inside black box algorithms, hidden server farms, and AI models no one outside a few companies can access, then we're arguing in the dark. We can shout louder, take stronger positions, and fight harder. But if we don't understand what's actually driving the division, we're shadowboxing. This is a dangerous place to be, because it means our usual democratic tools don't work as well. Public debate, investigative journalism, even elections themselves all depend on the assumption that we can see and name the problem. But when those problems are generated by systems that are invisible and unaccountable, democracy loses its ability to self-correct. That's why this matters now more than ever. It's not enough to demand better politics or less polarization. We have to demand transparency in the systems that shape our public life. Because without the ability to trace cause and effect, we can't rebuild trust. And without trust, democracy doesn't just weaken, it unravels. The takeaway is sobering. If we want democracy to survive, we can't just fight over symptoms. We have to make the system itself visible enough to diagnose and treat the disease. A clear real-world example of Harari's point is the way social media algorithms have shaped, and in many cases distorted, our public discourse. Think about platforms like Facebook, X, TikTok, or YouTube. Billions of people use them every day to get news, share opinions, and discuss politics. But the content you see isn't a neutral, chronological feed of what's happening in the world. It's the result of opaque algorithmic decisions designed to maximize engagement, not democratic health. Here's the kicker. No one outside these companies really knows how these algorithms work. Not lawmakers, not journalists, not even most of the engineers who work there. And when those algorithms treat what's trending and decide which posts to push to the top of your feed, the ripple effect can reshape entire elections, movements, or public debates without any one of us being able to trace why it happened. We've seen this during major political events, where certain topics explode overnight, while others disappear with no public explanation. Was it because people suddenly cared less, or because the algorithm adjusted a setting behind the scenes? We can't tell. And that uncertainty erodes trust in both the platforms and the conversations happening on them. This is exactly the why we are fighting each other problem Harari describes. The conflict feels real, but the causes are buried inside black boxes we can't open. And as long as we can't see or understand those mechanisms, fixing the democratic breakdown they cause will feel like chasing smoke. If part of the problem is that we can't see what's breaking democracy, then the solution has to start with making the system visible. That means turning Harari's principles into actual design choices, policies, and guardrails for our digital networks. Here are a few ways that could look. Algorithmic transparency laws require major platforms to disclose in clear, plain language the basic logic of their algorithms, Not every line of code, but enough to explain why we're seeing what we're seeing and what factors influence it. Public interest audits. Create independent bodies, not owned by tech companies or governments, to regularly audit algorithms for bias, manipulation, or harm to public trust. Their findings would be public, giving citizens and lawmakers a shared understanding of the system. User control over feeds. Let users choose how their information is sorted: chronological, relevance-based, friend first, and make those settings easy to change. Don't force a one-size-fits-all algorithm that prioritizes engagement over accuracy or trust. One source civic platforms. Fund and build publicly owned social networks designed for democratic conversation, not profit. These could operate like digital town halls, transparent, nonprofit, and accountable to the people who use them. Data portability and interoperability allows citizens to take their data and networks with them from one platform to another. This reduces monopoly power and puts control back in the hands of users instead of locking them inside opaque ecosystems. The point isn't that any one of these fixes democracy overnight. It's that if we can't see the system, we can't improve it. And if we don't demand that visibility right now, we risk losing the ability to have a shared conversation at all. If democracy is going to survive the computer age, we have to stop treating its principles as optional ideals and start treating them as system requirements. The fact that we can't even pinpoint why our public conversation is breaking down isn't just frustrating, it's a sign that our digital infrastructure wasn't built with democratic health in mind. It was built for scale, speed, and profit. Harari's warning is clear. The opacity of these systems, these networks, isn't an accident. It's a design choice, which means we need to make different choices. We need transparency baked in from the start. We need oversight that's accountable to the public, not just to shareholders. We need platforms that see civic trust as a feature, not a bug. Because if we keep running democracy on systems that are black boxes, we'll keep fighting over symptoms while the real disease spreads unchecked. And the cure, the one Harari keeps pointing us toward, is to take these ancient principles and encode them into the platforms, algorithms, and policies that run our public life, not as a patch, not as an afterthought, but as the foundation. Harari warns that one of the most dangerous signs for democracy today is that we can see it breaking down, but we can't always explain why, because so much of it is happening inside systems we can't see. If you could make one change to how today's major platforms and algorithms work to make them more transparent and accountable, what would it be? Would you focus on showing people how decisions are made, giving users more control, creating independent oversight, or something entirely different? We've now gone through Harari's 4 democratic principles, the risk of sliding into digital anarchy, and the danger of not even understanding what's breaking our systems. Taken together, these aren't just warnings, they're a blueprint. A reminder that democracy's survival in the digital age depends on whether we can see the system clearly, trust it enough to use it, and shape it so it reflects our deepest values. So let's bring it all together with a few takeaways. 1, the values democracy needs aren't new, but they must be encoded into our systems. Benevolence, decentralization, mutuality, and the right to rest and change are ancient principles, but in the digital age, they must be built into the algorithms, policies, and platforms that now shape public life. 2, democracy's openness is both its shield and its vulnerability. While decentralization protects against authoritarianism, it also risks creating digital anarchy, a fragmented landscape where shared reality and trust are hard to maintain. 3. Opacity is as dangerous as manipulation. When the forces driving our political division are hidden inside black box algorithms, we lose the ability to diagnose and fix the problem, making democratic self-correction almost impossible. 4. Solutions require design, not just debate. Transparency laws, public audits, user control, open source civic platforms, and data portability are all ways to align our digital networks with democratic health. And 5. The fight for democracy is now a fight over infrastructure. Whoever designs the code and controls the flow of information will shape the future of governance, which means citizens must demand a seat at the design table. We've talked a lot today about how the health of democracy depends on the systems that carry our conversations. So I'd love to hear from you. If you could change one thing about how our digital networks work to make them better for democracy, what would it be and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might spark someone else's next big idea. And if you found this conversation valuable, consider sharing it with a friend who cares about where democracy is headed. Thank you for spending this time with me here at Seeds of Meaning. If you're not already subscribed, I'd love for you to join us, not just to keep up, but to be a part of a community committed to slowing down, thinking deeply, and shaping the future with intention. And if you're ready to take these conversations even further, you can join the Seeds of Meaning book club. We meet regularly to explore books just like Nexus that challenge how we see the world and help us grow together. You'll find the link in the description. In the next episode, we're stepping into chapter 10, Totalitarianism, All Power to the Algorithms. If chapter 9 was about how democracy can protect itself in the computer age, chapter 10 is about the opposite. What happens when the system is built to concentrate all control, not in human hands, but in the hands of algorithms. It's a vision that's both chilling and entirely possible. Until then, keep questioning, keep listening, and keep planting seeds of meaning.